The ledger of the unwritten. It was the kind of morning that asked nothing of you. The kind that entered not through the eyes, but through the bones. Slow, warm, and without insistence. The light came softened through the round window, filtered by ivy leaves pressed gently against the glass. I had not yet lit the lamps. There was no need. The archive was quieter than usual. Not silent, no. Silence never truly existed here, but resting. Even the pages seemed to hold their breath, as if in reverence for the moment between endings and beginnings. On my desk lay a fresh ledger, unmarked, bound in bark-burnished leather and stitched with golden thread. I had commissioned it weeks ago, intending to begin a new series, a compendium of the minor histories. Those little moments, too fleeting for volumes, yet too strange to forget. I had even selected the ink, soft walnut, with a tincture of nightshade, the kind that stains gently but holds fast once dried. I dipped my quill and opened to the first page. The parchment crackled with that particular tender tension of anticipation. I wrote a period. Entry 1, on the sparrow who waited for snow. But the words did not stay. They bled backward into the paper, curling inwards like mist. Within seconds, the page was blank once more. No smear, no residue, no trace. I frowned. I tried again. Entry 1, the sparrow who waited. Gone. I examined the ink, still fresh. The quill, unbroken. The parchment, of fine quality. And yet each sentence I wrote dissolved, as though the page refused to carry it. The ledger rejected not the hand, but the thought. I sat back and stared at the blank book for a long time. There have been strange objects in the archive before. Volumes that hum, scrolls that write themselves, spines that vanish when observed too closely. But this was refusal. Gentle, but firm, and wholly uninterested in being explained. By midday, I had filled 3 entire pages with sentences that would not hold. None remained, and so I stopped writing. Instead, I listened. The light shifted. The leaves at the window trembled. A breeze moved through the shelf beside me, and a slip of paper detached itself from somewhere above, fluttering down like a feather and landing on the open ledger. It was not from this book. Its edges were torn, its script half faded, but I recognized the hand. My own. A note from years ago, perhaps a decade or more. It read, period. There are things that resist inscription, not because they are untrue, but because they are still becoming. I remembered then. The phrase had come to me in a dream during a season of storms. I had written it down and forgotten it, never finding the right place to file it. But here it was, having waited patiently for a page that would accept it. I placed it gently back inside the ledger and closed the cover. This book, it seemed, was not for completed thoughts. It was for what could not yet be written. I spent the next hour not writing, but gathering. There were drawers in the archive I rarely opened, those with broken labels, faded strings, or nothing at all to name them. Little places where fragments collect, out of time and out of sequence. slips of bark with etched syllables, torn vellum with half-legible diagrams, wax-sealed envelopes containing only dust and the memory of something that had once been meant to be said. One by one, I brought them to the table, not to catalogue, not to decipher, but to simply sit with them. Among the items, I found a folded page with a pressed ginkgo leaf inside. Written in a soft, trembled line beneath it, period. She smiled, and it rained. That is all I remember. Another note bore only a circle drawn in pale green ink with no words at all. And yet when I looked at it, I heard the distant sound of chimes. Not in my ears, but in memory. A small packet wrapped in twine contained a series of questions written by a child's hand. Do owls dream? Where do broken songs go? If a name is never spoken, can it still fade? I placed them all into the unwritten ledger. Some were simply set between pages, others I copied carefully, preserving their shape and slant. I did not number them, I gave them no order, and the ledger held them. It did not absorb or erase, it simply accepted. This changed something in me. In the days that followed, I found myself waking earlier, drawn to the desk by a quiet pull. I did not seek to record answers, only traces, like morning mist clinging to the bark of memory. One morning I returned from the herb garden to find a line freshly inked in the ledger, written in a hand not my own. Some stories arrive only when no one is looking. I touched the ink, still damp. I waited. Nothing more appeared. I began to leave questions open. Incomplete sentences hung gently on the edges of thought. The one I met by the silent lake. There was a night the stars refused to rise, and still she, when the last feather fell. Each line remained, no longer erased. Perhaps the book had learned my rhythm, or perhaps I had learned its. The circular window became my measure of time. Morning gold through ivy, afternoon pale grey. Night, the dark mirror of my own feathered reflection. Sometimes I would write by starlight, tracing ideas that felt older than I could name. The ledger grew fatter, not in pages filled, but in weight. It felt heavier in my talons, as though the unsaid were more substantial than anything I had inscribed before. And then, one night, I found a name. Not in the book, but outside the archive, on a stone tucked beneath a root near the threshold. It read, period. Ilenna. I had never written it, but I had dreamed it. Years ago. The name clung to me like fog, Ilenna. It was not unfamiliar, though I could not place it. Not from a register, not from a scroll. No official ledger in the archive bore that name. And yet, when I whispered it aloud, the air seemed to pause, as though waiting for something it already knew. I brought the stone inside and placed it on the windowsill, beside a sprig of dried myrrh and a feather I could no longer identify. That evening I ventured deeper into the western stacks, an area where the light does not linger, where the smell of lichen is stronger than parchment, and where the shelves lean ever so slightly inward, as if listening. There, hidden behind volumes wrapped in bark cloth, I discovered a narrow drawer, sealed with no lock, only a bundle of red thread. Inside, I found a small book, unmarked, its cover made of river-worn leather. When I opened it, a dry leaf fell out, and a single line greeted me. Period. To the one who writes what I could not. Every page was filled, yet none completed. Half-sentences, sketches, doodles in the margins. Repeated words. A single phrase etched over and over in different styles. It was not the time. I ran a talon along the inside cover. The name had been scratched faintly, then re-inked, then smudged, as if the writer could not decide whether to be found. But it was there, at last. Ilenna. I ran a talon along the inside cover. The name had been scratched faintly, then re-inked, then smudged, as if the writer could not decide whether to be found. But it was there, at last. Ilenna. The pages read like thoughts in formation, ideas not yet ripe enough for binding, but too urgent to let vanish. Dreams, confessions, fragments of sorrow and light. They reminded me of the way memories feel before they are spoken. Not quite real, but no less true. I sat there long into the night, reading. One entry held only a diagram of a tree with 7 roots and a single word next to each root. Listen, forget, scatter, glow, return, wait, write. Another page contained a list titled Things I Should Have Said But Didn't. It read, period, that I was afraid, that I loved the sound of her silence, that I heard the archive breathing at night, that I never finished the letter, that I wished I could. Ilenna had once written here, I was sure of it. Not officially, not in the ledgers the others handled, but in the in-between places, the whisper cracks, the unnoticed drawers, the margins. A quiet ghost of thought, still writing. When I placed her journal into the unwritten ledger, it slid between the pages without resistance. The two belonged together, like echoes folded into echo. That night I dreamed of ivy growing in reverse, leaves curling back into the stem, returning to a place of origin. And I heard a voice, not loud, not near, but certain. You are not alone in the unwritten. In the days that followed, the archive changed, quietly, imperceptibly, but truly. The western wind, which once passed through the archive like a distant sigh, began to carry the scent of something softer, fresh parchment and late autumn figs. The pages in the unwritten ledger no longer faded or resisted. They welcomed what was tentative, what had no resolution. They became a place not of conclusion, but of continuity. One morning I found a line I did not remember writing. It read, period. Some entries are meant to be lived, not stored. I stared at it for a long while, then carefully tore the page from the ledger, not in haste, but in ceremony. I folded it once, pressed it into a small glass vial, sealed it with wax, and placed it in a hidden niche beneath the floorboards, beside an old bell and a sprig of dried sage. Let the archive forget it. Let me remember. The boundary between record and reflection had thinned. I began to see signs of other unwritten things. A scroll tucked behind a support beam with only the word "maybe." A drawing on the back of a tax ledger, showing a figure looking out a round window. My window, framed by ivy. Notes scratched into the walls of drawers, too faint for ink, but present in grain. The archive, it seemed, held not only what was known, but what was hoped for. I returned to Ilenna's book often, not to read, but to sit near it. Her thoughts no longer felt like interruptions or abandonments. They were pauses, necessary spaces, places where breath might gather. And I began to mimic her practice. I wrote only when I did not know what to say. And the words came differently, like fog, like early rain, like silence that didn't hurt. Not always clear, not always beautiful, but true. One evening, I set a new page onto the desk. The ledger lay open beside me. A single candle flickered. I wrote a period. There is no final version of a soul. The ink stayed. Then another line appeared, not from my hand. Period. But there are drafts worth keeping. I smiled. Outside, the wind shifted. A leaf brushed the window pane. The room smelled of ink and green things. I looked around the archive and realized none of this had ever been meant to be finished. The archive was not a vault, it was a living pause. And so I began a new shelf. Not for book, but for the unfinished. A place for what I might never fully understand. A place for echoes, for fragments, for questions unanswered. A place where even the silent could be heard, if not in ink, then in presence. I named it the Hollow of the Unwritten. And every morning since I have found new things waiting there. Notes I do not recall writing, leaves with etched veins that form sentences, the occasional whisper of another hand, another mind, asking gently, "May I leave this with you?" And always I answer, period. Yes, it belongs here.